Well, it is my pleasure to be sitting here with the formidable Cecile Richards, president of that battleground of the culture wars, Planned Parenthood. As you've seen, she has endured 12 unbelievable months of rabid political attacks over these doctored videotapes claiming to show that Planned Parenthood peddled fetal body parts for profit. And even though a Texas grand jury finally dispatched the lie and actually indicted those perpetrators, it hasn't been enough. It hasn't been enough to call off the dogs who continue to harass her, as you can see really in every single presidential debate we're seeing. So, I mean, this was the year from hell for you, for Planned Parenthood. I mean, it really was. Did you know immediately that the videos were doctored and when they were released, and that they would cause you the most awful political nightmare?
Well, I knew they were doctored, of course, and this has been a tactic that our opponents, and not just opponents to Planned Parenthood, but I think it's important to say opponents to all women's health care, all reproductive health care. So I knew they were doctored, and it's really been sad to see, though, that this is now, as was demonstrated in the video, become part of the presidential debate, that we now have every single Republican running for the President of the United States, not only championing ending safe and legal abortion in America, but bragging about ending access to Planned Parenthood, which of course provides millions of folks access to basic health care, including breast cancer screenings and birth control and all else. I will say, though, I mean, there were some tough months, but it was pretty sweet justice to have these two folks indicted by a Republican district attorney in Texas who had been appointed by Governor Rick Perry. So I think it's important to point out that when you actually look at the facts and you are impartial, there was no wrongdoing by Planned Parenthood, and the only people that broke the law were these perpetrators of this scam.
It was a staggering reversal. It was really amazing. So what kind of damage, though, did it do to Planned Parenthood, this attack, this endless stream of bad allegations?
Well, it's interesting. So, Tina, we're actually about to celebrate our 100th anniversary, Planned Parenthood, this year. And I'd like to remind people that our founder began to hand out birth control pamphlets before it was even legal to educate women about birth control. And the story goes that she and her sister Ethel had opened up a storefront and women were lined up down the block from day one. 10 days later, an undercover cop posing as a mother, if it will sound familiar, busted her and sent her to jail, where she taught all of her fellow inmates about birth control. And so I do think that we have a history in Planned Parenthood of being under attack and trying to push forward for women's health and rights. And to me, what has gotten us through these last several months of political attacks has been the extraordinary care that we deliver. And that is really why we've seen, in fact, 500,000 people join as supporters in the last 6 months alone, and because why our reputation continues to be one of the most popular organizations in America, and that's because our doors stay open, and every single day, folks come to us for health care.
So tell us, I mean, who are the patients of the clients, I think you call them, of Planned Parenthood? I mean, who are the mix of people that come to you?
Well, it's folks from all walks of life. I was a Planned Parenthood patient back in college to get birth control, and I imagine many people probably in this room were. We serve about 2.5 million people every single year, and not only women, but many young men now as well come to us because they want confidential treatment for STDs or information they may not be able to get anywhere else. And folks come from all walks of life. And we have, I mean, this is the thing I try to explain to some of the politicians who want to defund Planned Parenthood, as they say, like, Republicans come to Planned Parenthood every single day. They come to us for health care, and because they need a high-quality, affordable provider. And so it is ridiculous to me that any time, but particularly this day and age, that we would think the access to health care is something that only one party should be in support of. And I think a lot of Republicans would agree.
Yeah, but your testimony on the Hill was really rough. I mean, it was very aggressive. I mean, when they piled on. I mean, you were obviously prepared for that attack, but did anything about the hearings really surprise you?
I think the only thing that surprised me, although I don't know why it should have, is the total lack of empathy for women in America. The real lack of interest in what our patients face, why women would come to Planned Parenthood, why millions of women in this country need access to affordable birth control. And so I think that part really did shock me, that I thought if it was a hearing that they would be there to hear someone, but it really was much more, I thought, just people wanting to get out their political points. I mean, it was quite an experience, and I did try to get ready for it. But I think the best comment I heard that day was we had to take one break when they were going to vote, and my son Daniel texted me and he said, "Mom, you're doing so well. I think yeah, I know." And he says, I think raising me really helped you prepare for today and this hearing." So a lot of folks helped.
So, why do you think that organizations that address women's health are so vehemently targeted by Republican politicians? I mean, I'm trying to get into their heads. I'm trying to understand. You know, there are currently 5 different congressional investigations underway.
Correct.
What is it about this subject that makes them so rabid?
I think that what's happened, and I really want to speak up for the Republicans in this country who completely disagree with what's happening, both in Congress and in this presidential election. I mean, the irony is Planned Parenthood was started by Republicans all across the country. You know, the Goldwater family started us in Arizona. I could go down the list. I think what's happened is we have gotten into a state in this country, and I think we're seeing some part of this reflected in the elections, where it is the most extreme wing of the party that has now taken over the Republican Party, and even moderate Republicans who support Planned Parenthood, support women's rights, and are really what I think of as traditional conservative Republicans who believe in small government have lost their voice. And it's a shame, it's a disservice to our democracy. And I look forward to the day when women's health is not a partisan issue in America.
Yeah, well, so do we all. So obviously, Texas is really ground zero in the battle for women's reproductive rights. What are you seeing there in the closing of clinics?
It's unbelievable, Tina. And I think when I look at what's happened in Texas, I just think it's a cautionary tale for what's being promised by some of these folks running for president. So as folks may know, and that is my home state, so I feel like I've had to witness it on every visit I go to. But first, they tried to get rid of Planned Parenthood by shutting down the women's health program, which closed dozens of health centers, most of which were not Planned Parenthood. Hundreds of thousands of women lost access to basic health care, not abortion services. We're talking birth control, cancer screenings. And now, of course, they've passed these restrictions that have reduced the number of abortion providers in the state to really a handful. And, of course, this case is going to go up to the Supreme Court in March, which will be a case absolutely to watch. The sad aspect of this is, there was just a New England Journal of Medicine article out last week, which very clearly showed that the closure of these centers has now led to reduced access to birth control and more women having children that they did not choose, that they did not plan. And of course, the really the heartbreaking part of it is really hitting low-income women the very worst. If you live in the Rio Grande border now of Texas, you have very few options for health care, and many women are now going over the border, and we've seen estimates of up to 250,000 women trying to self-abort in the last several years in Texas. And yeah, it's really, we're better than that as a country, and I hope that everybody in this nation thinks really carefully about what kind of government we need and want next November.
Well, during the time that you've led Planned Parenthood, it seems as if pro-life anger, has definitely grown more rancorous and violent. Do you feel it's got more so? Is it a more misogynistic culture now than it was? You've been at Planned Parenthood 9 years. Is it worse than it was when you took over?
I do think it's gotten uglier politically, and that's really disturbing. You can't help but look at the presidential candidates and think, where are they? What century are they living in? I think Elizabeth Warren said it best. She did they fall down and hit their head and think they woke up in the 1950s? It really is alarming, and I think that you think about young women today. It's extraordinary the opportunities that we have. Largely because of birth control access and because of reproductive health care access, women are now almost half the workforce in America. We're half the undergraduates. We are doctors and we are lawyers, and we have 3 women on the Supreme Court, and we have 20 women in the United States Senate, although as Claire McCaskill says, what would be better would be 50. And so it's incredible that at the same time that we are making all of this progress, we have politicians, not the American people, we have politicians who are literally trying to take us back to the last century.
Yeah, it's. What do you think fuels a man like Robert Deere, you know, that crazy guy we saw on the screen, to murder 3 people and injure 9 near a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs? I mean, so fueled by his misogynistic rage that he goes and conducts this total, you know, homicidal act.
I mean, who knows what his all of his particular situation is, but I do think, look, words matter, and what people say matters. And when you have months and months of politicians, people who want to run for president of the United States, who want to be president of the United States, talking about Planned Parenthood in the way that they have, and Carly Fiorina, they're lying repeatedly after being shown that she's completely falsifying everything she said. I think it's really incumbent on us as a country to really think carefully about what the impact of our words and our statements are.
Do you think that talk shows, you know, these radio talk shows and the internet also is fueling these sort of misogynistic, you know, angers?
They're saying the most hateful things is just incredible to me. And I do think, I mean, we certainly see it, and we saw, I mean, not coincidentally, after these attacks and the video smear campaign and all the hysteria, we've seen renewed violence at health centers across this country, at Planned Parenthood. And very proud of the folks in Colorado Springs after that tragedy. They're reopening that health center in just a couple of days. And I think that's what we have to do, is we just have to show that we will not be cowed by violence or hatred or misogynistic speak. And as we say at Planned Parenthood, these doors stay open, and that's our commitment.
Oh, fantastic. Well, obviously, before you took over Planned Parenthood, you know, you were actually a union organizer, weren't you? And
Yes,
of course, you were also the daughter of one of the most famous women in American politics, the salty, feisty, fabulous Governor Ann Richards of Texas. Tell me about being Ann Richards' daughter. I mean, she was under constant attack, right, when she was running for governor. And they called her a lesbian. They called her a drunk. I mean, they called her everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
So how was that to grow up with?
No, I mean, look, she was extraordinary, and I think she's all of us who saw what she went through to be elected governor of Texas witnessed what I think a lot of women do when they're running for office. We have to be perfect. We have to be funny, but we have to be, you know, politically correct and not too much this, not too much that. But you know, Mom was incredibly resilient, and as she would say, you know, you kind of had to take her warts and all. And she was divorced. She was a recovering alcoholic. She made no bones about it, and the people liked her and supported her, as she would say, despite all of that.
Well, you became this union organizer, which a lot of which you know, you were actually advocating for garment, hotel, and healthcare employees, right? And I would assume that most of them are women.
Yep, minimum wage workers.
Minimum wage workers. What did you learn from those women?
Well, it's really funny, Tina. I mean, that was, of course, that was probably the best experience of my life, because it really made me understand what women, and particularly working moms, face just to keep their families together. Many of these folks, they were the only you know, wage earner, and they're the same women that come to Planned Parenthood. They're just trying to do the best they can for their families and get ahead. And I learned a lot about the strength of women and the strength of what they will do to make sure that their children have more opportunities than they did. And that's what I guess I think about all of the political rhetoric that we're hearing now, is that there's not a woman in America that wants her daughter to have fewer rights than she did. And that's why I think these guys will not be successful. You know?
So the New Hampshire primary returns are coming in. Bernie Sanders has trounced Hillary, right? Hillary's way behind Bernie Sanders. How can it be that at this time, you know, where we're in the middle of so much vitriol against women from the Republican side, why isn't it that younger women are rallying to Hillary? Why is she not catching fire with young women?
I mean, I think she does have a lot of young women supporters and young men supporters. I was just with them in New Hampshire and in Iowa. And, you know, this is a long election. It's going to be a long election season. What I would say is the exciting thing for me, and I've been an organizer all my life, is just to see young people involved in this election. That is look, I feel like we are going to need every single young person in this country next November. And so the fact that they're politically involved for whatever candidate they're choosing to support is really good. And I think it's a good sign about our democracy.
Okay, well, now, on the other side tonight, let's just set aside the fact that Trump has won New Hampshire, okay? Because that we just have to decide is like, that is like just a bad dream.
It's incredible.
But we have seen Kasich rise in these returns, and it might seem as if Kasich is now going to be the kind of, quote, mainstream Republican choice, rather than Marco Rubio, who was totally decimated by Chris Christie the other night. What would a Kasich presidency be like for women?
A complete and utter disaster. And I think it's really important because I think Governor Kasich has sort of come off as a moderate, and I guess only by comparison to Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. But it is really important to know in Ohio, more than half the providers of safe and legal abortion have had to shut down. He's signed 17 separate bills to restrict reproductive access in the state. It is really it's really rivaling Texas as the worst place for women to get access to health care. And so we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that folks know about his record and where he really stands.
Yeah, because I don't think they do. I mean, he did, like they all do, brag that he had defunded Planned Parenthood, but I hadn't realized he was quite that bad.
Yep.
So, Cecile, what is your next move? I mean, you know, 9 years Planned Parenthood. You could
Put me out to pasture.
if
Yeah.
you had to pass. Are you going to run for governor of Texas? Come on. I mean,
Can
Texas
you imagine
needs
that
you.
profile?
Texas needs
Right.
you desperately.
It's an interesting career plan to run Planned Parenthood to then go back and run for governor of Texas.
Bernie Sanders could say it could be done.
But I'll think about it. Yeah, exactly. No, look, I think I'm keenly focused on not only Planned Parenthood, we're expanding in the South, we are expanding online. Now young people can make appointments on their mobile phones. I mean, there's so much good stuff happening. Lowest teen pregnancy rate in 40 years in the United States. So there's a lot of great work that's out there. And then, of course, my side job with Planned Parenthood Action Fund is make sure we have a president who supports and advances women in this country. And we got to get that done.
Okay, so the Supreme Court, what's going to happen there? I mean,
that's why we need a president.
That's right. Well, what are the chances that Roe v. Wade are going to get overturned in the next?
I think that when folks vote this November, literally Roe versus Wade is on the ballot. The impact that the next president will have in appointing justices and what their attitudes are towards women is going to be critical and determinative. And not just for a couple of years, but for a long, long time. Folks should really watch and see what happens in this March case. I think it's going to give us a lot of information about where this court's going to go.
Well, Cecile Richards, thank you so much for
so great to be
taking
here.
the stand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for having me. Great to be here. Thanks.